that when it's excessively well drained, that you don't check excessive, that you check low or very low available water, and you check rapid permeability. But you can check that for me, Jim. We'll get back to you on that. What's in my head right now is moderately well drained or wetter. Permeability, that's a lip.
All but well and excessive. Check.
So I was right.
All but well and excessive.
I was right. Okay. Permeability. Checked. It's a problem whenever it's either rapid or slow. If it's moderate, there's no limitation. In this case, it was checked because our subsoil texture was coarse, and coarse textures correlate to rapid permeability. Available water capacity. Joe ran through the calculation of available water capacity, came out 4.07 inches. In the low category, that becomes a limiting factor. And of course, stoniness or rock outcrop is when you have stones on the surface or rock outcrop that is something greater than 10 inches within every 30 feet, generally. We didn't have that here. Okay, now using the chart, where does that take us from the standpoint of land capability class? If you do it by the numbers and you run down through that chart, the stuff about being shallow, less than 8 or 10 inches to bedrock, there's stuff about flooding, and you can walk yourself down through that based on the information on the sign. It takes you down ultimately to what's the drainage class of this soil. So the drainage class of this soil was well drained. It's well drained because the surface was moderately coarse, subsoil was coarse. If they'd both been coarse, the drainage class would have been excessive. So in this case, you would walk down through that schematic, you'd follow off on the angle that says well drained, and then what do you look at? You look at the slope class that you put it in. You put it in strongly sloping, 8 to 15% slopes. You come across, it tells you it's in capability class 3E. How many got 3E? Don't forget the asterisk on that chart. If you look down in the block that the asterisk refers to, it says, beware, if the soil past erosion is severely eroded, you reduce the land capability class by 1. In other words, it's more limiting. In this case, you came out based on slope with capability class 3E. Severe erosion makes it 4E. Everybody see that? We break up here, take a look at those capability charts, and there's a block right on there. There's a little asterisk that's supposed to draw your attention to it. Usually it doesn't do that good a job, but what can I say? Okay, that takes care of capability class. Again, primarily dictated by slope. Of course, wetness can be a limitation, and low available water. They all play into these various capability classes, but you can follow through the chart to get in the right category. Now, if we turn our attention to practices, from the agricultural standpoint, the first issue that we address is drainage. And of course, this site is well drained, so we don't need any drainage. You might note that on the sign, we had artificial drainage. What did we put? Undrained. The reason we put that on there, on that information sign, is because in some sites, in some soils, that are poorly drained or very poorly drained, to put it in the right capability class on that chart, you need to know whether it is now drained or undrained. That's the only reason that's on it. Don't read anything else into that. So at every site, we put that on the chart. At this site, it doesn't mean nothing because this is a well-drained soil. I think the only place it means anything is on poorly drained stuff, or maybe somewhat. At any rate, around this neck of the woods, generally, if the soils are moderately well drained or wetter, That is, if there's gray models above 40 inches, gray colors indicating wetness, we would use deep ditch or tile or both. And then in combination, we've got some coastal plain stuff floating around. On coastal plain stuff, if we're in slowly permeable soils, then you might want to use shallow ditch. I can assure you our experience has been over the last, I don't know how many years, we've graded that very liberally. But the important thing is to recognize if you have a wetness problem in the soil, to see the gray models interfering with the reds, that tells you that you got a seasonal high water. Sometime during the year you need some drainage. All right, how about erosion control? Now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what conservation practices we need to farm this land and to keep erosion to a minimum. In this case, no-till equipment was not available. As a consequence, you're guided by the fact that you're in capability class, first of all, 3E based on slope, 4E based on severe past erosion, so that automatically takes you to contour farming. On gently sloping slopes, contour strip cropping. On gently sloping slopes, we use contour farming. On strongly sloping slopes, we use contour strip cropping. With both of those, we also use grass waterways. Any questions about that?
I got a question.
Well, yes.
With the trees being that close and everything like that,
What's that got to do with anything?
it wouldn't.
Except wind erosion.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Sorry.
not too
I
close.
thought you were going a different direction.
No, I'm talking about wind erosion control. That wouldn't affect that.
Good question. Good question. Because our guidance for you, we put it in terms of permanent vegetation on the information side. We tell you, in essence, what the height of the vegetation is at a certain distance away from the prevailing wind direction. The prevailing wind direction is not from that way, it's from over there. See? So on this one, we put 40 feet at, what is it, 600 feet? Something like that. As a consequence, the guiding criteria for that is that if you have some interrupting vegetation greater than 15 feet tall, and it's within 1,000 feet, you do not have a wind erosion problem. That's the guideline we work with. Okay?
The slope blows it out there.
All right, what else we have here? Oh, the other thing I wanted to say when we get into contour farming, contour stripping, the one caveat that we have with that deals with no-till equipment. Now, when no-till equipment is not available, it's not an issue. It's either contour farming or contour strip cropping. Or if it's flat, like that site up there on the hill, that's 2%, you should have just used none other than cover crops. But if no-till is available, no-till in and of itself is sufficient to control erosion if the slope is less than 10% percentage and the slope length is less than 300 feet. So you look on the sign, get the slope length. If the slope length is over 300 feet and you're using contour strip cropping out here and you also have no-till equipment available, then you check them all. If it's less than 300 feet and or the slope is less than 10%, no-till equipment by itself is sufficient. You would not need contour strip cropping and waterways. Bottom line is you're keeping the surface covered with vegetation and residue. You don't get any runoff. That's the story. What else we have here? Diversions. When are we going to use diversions? Basically on class 3 and 4E land, we could argue that they ought to be used right here, except that we only use them where the slope length